Welcome to Living Your Greatness. Each episode, we bring on great people to inspire you to achieve your greatness. We discuss topics all related to health and wellness. Listen to world-class stories, learn valuable lessons, and turn knowledge into action. It is now time for you to unlock your inner greatness. Welcome back, everyone, to Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Ben Mummy, and today we have a new guest to the show, and his name is Trevor Ragan. So for those of you guys who don't know Trevor is the co-owner of the Learner Lab. Trevor understands the science of how to become a better learner, and Trevor has worked with best-selling authors, Olympic coaches, professional athletes, professors, thousands of coaches, teachers, students, players from all over the world. These experiences have helped Trevor understand some incredibly important research and concepts in the fields of motor learning, performance science, and psychology that can make a huge difference in the learning process. So Trevor, welcome to the show. It is a pleasure to have you on today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to dig into this conversation.
All right, Trevor, so let's get kicking. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you spend your formative years growing up? What inspired you to become an entrepreneur? And how and when did you start up the Learner Lab?
So I grew up in Wyoming, aka the middle of nowhere, up here down in the States. And both of my parents were coaches. So my dad was football, basketball. My mom was basketball, volleyball. And so I just grew up around sports. And my heroes growing up were my parents' players. And so growing up in a gym, having that sports background, I was always curious about development. Because you see, it's wow, these really good players, they spend a lot of time working. And so that's instilled in you at a young age. And so growing up, having that exposure, I think planted a couple seeds of the curiosity of learning and performance. I don't really consider myself an entrepreneur. I know I started this, but I'm not someone who's cooking up new ideas every year and pursuing them or innovating the platform or the technology around this. I think that I recognized a gap in sort of the way people talk about learning, the way we coach and design practices, and what the science was saying. And so my goal was I think I could fill this gap and become sort of a translator of, let me go find the experts, the scientists. Let me go spend a weekend with them and ask them really dumb questions and really, really try to understand what their research says and how we could apply it, and then translate that and explain it to someone so they could actually use it. I think there's kind of a bubble around the research and science world where it's hard to access papers, ideas, and even when you do access them, it's hard to understand what they're talking about and how you could use it. And so I kind of wanted to position myself as the translator of, let me do the digging, let me connect the dots, let me explain this stuff in a way that you could use it. And I like that position in the world of learning. And obviously, that's a simplified version of this long journey I've been on. I've zigged and zagged as far as what I think matters the most and the topics we talked about. But that from the start was the goal. And that's what I hope to keep doing forever.
So Trevor, you gave a TEDx talk, which was called Learning Like a Jungle Tiger. Could you please share with our listeners what this talk was about? Why should we pay close attention? And what are some key takeaways that are important?
So the talk is basically a bigger metaphor for a truth of learning that we all know, but sometimes we forget. It's if you're going to grow, whether it's that we're talking about a muscle or a skill, you have to stretch and challenge yourself. You have to struggle a bit. You have to kind of stretch out of your comfort zone. And we know that. We use the jungle and zoo tiger example as a way to drive that point home. And so the idea is, okay, you have two tigers and one tiger grows up in a zoo and the other tiger grows up in the jungle. Two very different situations those tigers are in. The zoo tiger's life is very easy and predictable. You sit in a box every day, you get food, water, shelter. It's very easy. Every day's the same. You don't struggle. And then the opposite would be true for the jungle tiger. Every day is different. there's unpredictability, there's change, there's problems, there's a lot more struggle that occurs in the jungle. And then the question would be, well, which one of the two tigers is going to learn more? Well, the jungle tiger would. Of course they would. You could ask that question to a 5-year-old and they'd say the jungle tiger would. And it's just an example of like, look, if we want to grow, we need to understand the things that lead to growth, which means we need to spend more time kind of learning like the jungle tiger, solving problems, dealing with unpredictability, struggling in the right ways. And it's through those experiences that we grow. And so we came up with this story. It's like driving this point home that when it comes to learning, we kind of get to choose what tiger to be. We can choose to learn like the jungle tiger, which is choosing to struggle a bit, or we could choose to learn like the zoo tiger, which is doing only the things that are comfortable and easy. And every day we get to make that choice. We're presented these opportunities all the time, and we could choose to jungle or zoo tiger. Now, the one piece I wish I would have been more specific on is like, learning like a jungle tiger doesn't mean we're reckless or bold or aggressive. It's actually about the small choices. It's like asking a question. That's being a jungle tiger, because it's more difficult to ask a question than to not ask the question. Or choosing to apply for a new position within your company. That's choosing to be the jungle tiger. Choosing to learn new software technology. Those are examples of us making the choice to learn like the jungle tiger. And when we ask the question, have the tough conversation, apply for the new position, learn the new software, we grow more than if we don't. And that's the bottom line. And so when you get into the science of development, whether you're looking at it through the deliberate practice lens or just like skill development as a whole, you see we must struggle a bit to grow, which means we have to find ways to stretch ourselves out of the comfort zone. That's like, I would say, the price of admission we have to pay to grow is a bit of struggle, bit of mistakes. And being the jungle tiger is a good way to like drive that idea home.
Trevor, this brings me to my next question. The early hours of learning a new skill is always challenging, but a little persistence can result in skill improvement. If you persist and practice in a purposeful way, you'll always experience dramatic improvements in a very short period of time. But Trevor, why is it so hard to learn new skills in the beginning? Is it because our minds naturally gravitate towards a fixed mindset, or is it fear?
I think so. This is an important distinction, and I'm glad you asked the question that way. And this is something I got wrong early on, where you get into the mindset research, and then we understand this idea of a fixed mindset, which is the belief that we can't really change and grow. And then we come to this false conclusion that all inaction is because of a fixed mindset. But it's usually way more complicated than that. It's like, look, if I'm not jumping into a learning journey, it could absolutely be because of a fixed mindset. It's like, well, I don't believe I can learn this thing, I'm probably not going to start. But I think just as prevalent and maybe even more common is something related to fear, which is like, yo, I don't like how it feels when I struggle. I don't really like being bad at something. And so that's kind of more of a fear-based angle. And then what you find is, as you started to talk to people and like really dig in, it's oftentimes a combo. It's not just one, it's not just the other. Fixed mindset and fear can actually enhance one another. So let's say I have a strong fixed mindset towards a particular subject in school. Let's just say math. So like deep down, I believe it's like, look, I'm not a math person. I can't learn math. Well, obviously, I'm going to like that idea in my head is going to rob me of opportunities in practice in one way or the other. But because I have this fixed mindset towards math, I'm probably going to experience more fear around math as well. It's like now I'm in a math class, and not only do I don't believe I can learn the thing, but I'm also fearful of the challenges that are thrown at me in that subject. Another example would be if I believe I'm just not a people person, or I'm not capable of like speaking in public, I'm going to be afraid of speaking in public. Or if I'm really, really afraid of speaking in public, I could assume it's because I'm not born to be a public speaker. And so that the fear and stories kind of play off of one another, but it's important to understand the difference between the two, because that helps us kind of like solve the problem versus all inaction is a fixed mindset and the solution is a growth mindset and you'll be good to go. It's like way more complex than that.
So, Trevor, what are some misconceptions about learning habits?
I think there are a ton of misconceptions about all these topics that we've touched on. I think for like learning as a whole, there's a ton of ideas about like the 10,000 hour rule is floating around. There's these ideas about like, oh, growth mindset can help solve every problem when that's not the case. And so I see these misconceptions, and most of them I see because I fell into those traps myself. And it's important to just like kind of zoom out and just be realistic about the learning science. It's like maybe the biggest distinction is like, look, the research of neuroplasticity says clearly pretty much anyone can get better at pretty much any skill, period. Now, as far as how fast we go and where we end up, of course, that's different. But if it's a skill, we can absolutely get better at it through quality practice. Great. That's not saying anyone can do anything. And so sometimes people take research like growth mindset, neuroplasticity, and then they like finagle it into anyone can do anything. And that's just not the case. Like, I'm not going to go become a major league baseball player because I know about neuroplasticity and have a growth mindset. It's like there are all sorts of limitations that we have. Now, what the science does say is our capacity to grow is much greater than we know, for sure. That's an accurate statement. And so I think the one pattern I see in the misconceptions around this is we just have to be accurate and specific about what the science is saying. Dweck's mindset research is specifically about beliefs. A growth mindset is the belief I can build a skill. It's the belief I can grow. And a fixed mindset is the belief that I have what I have and can't change it. That's all it is. Now, those beliefs can shape our actions in different ways, but then you see people using Dweck's research and creating these posters about like, this is all the things that happen when you have a fixed mindset and all the things that happen when you have a growth mindset. It's like, look, some of those things are true, but you don't teach mindset through action. You teach it through the belief. Get to the core of what it actually is, and then the actions will take care of themselves. And so I know that's kind of a long answer, but the goal to like sidestep the misconceptions is to get specific into the core of what the topic or research is actually about.
So, Trevor, can you share a time in your life when you were trying to learn a new skill and what you did to not get frustrated?
Yeah, I think it's like the thing that's helped me the most is to kind of change the target there. And for me, early when I was younger, the goal was not to be frustrated, not to feel weird. And that avoidance of the tough emotions actually messes me up. And so, what we talk about in a lot of our workshops is like understanding that we don't have much control over how we feel. We have a lot of control over how we interpret those feelings. And so or young Trevor, back in the day, Trevor, if I was presented a challenge and I felt weird, nervous, afraid, stressed, I assumed that I wasn't ready for that situation. It's like, oh, if I'm nervous, that's because I'm not prepared, not ready, not smart enough, too young, whatever it may be, because I interpret the tough emotions as a negative thing. And what I've learned through years and years of work and talking to people way smarter than me is that those feelings, those tough emotions, stress, anxiety, fear are human. That's the human response to things that challenge you. It's like called a comfort zone for a reason. If you get out of the comfort zone, it's not comfortable. And so I've now learned to sort of recalibrate how I interpret that. Now, when I'm nervous before an opportunity or feeling a bit of fear before a challenge, I know, oh, that's because I'm a human. That's how my brain's wired to work. It's not because I don't belong or not because I'm too young. And so that has helped me the most is just adjusting the way I think about tough emotions. Um, and so, like I said, that's a skill that I think is essential in the learning process. And then a couple ideas to maybe like minimize the difficulty of learning, we talk a lot about like, look, the early stages of learning for sure is ugly and uncomfortable, and there's no way around it, but we don't have to do that like in front of everyone in the world either. And so we call that like learning backstage. It's like, hey, if I'm practicing like better storytelling that I'm going to incorporate into my workshops, I don't have to like read a book on storytelling and then incorporate all those tools into the next workshop I do, and it's like a full on experiment. It's like, no, I can take these tactics backstage and I can kind of wrestle with them and I can practice with them in my conversations with maybe friends or family. And I can start to get the hang of the tools before I go out on the stage and actually use them. And so I call that learning backstage. And I have a blog post about, it's like, uh, my friends and I used to like go eat sushi a lot. And one of my friends like could not use chopsticks. And like every time we'd go, he was like super embarrassed about like using chopsticks. And it was so bad that like he would like ask for a fork and then the waiter would make fun of him. He like stopped going to sushi with us because it's like, I just hate like that feeling of embarrassment of like not being able to use chopsticks, feeling like I don't fit in. What's the solution to that? Well, the solution to that isn't like, oh, Dan, every time we're at dinner, look like an idiot with your chopsticks and spill stuff all over your shirt. The solution to that is, Dan, take these wooden chopsticks that are like 30 cents and go home, and for the next week, use them by yourself for all the meals you eat. And in a week, you're going to get the hang of it and you're going to be good. And then that problem is solved forever. It's like, going backstage gives us a little more wiggle room to struggle without people watching us. And then the key is to not just stay backstage. Eventually, when we get the hang of something, we got to go incorporate it and integrate it into what we do. And so I think that's an important way to give ourselves permission to struggle, because the truth is we're not just going to avoid that step, but we can kind of do it backstage. It's like comedians do that. It's like when Chris Rock or like Dave Chappelle works on new material, they're not doing it on their HBO special. They're doing it in small clubs, small audiences where they're working their new material. And then they take that, what works, and then they put it on the HBO special. And so there's examples of this everywhere.
So do you believe it takes 10,000 hours to master your skill, or are there any faster shortcuts?
So this is one, like this topic is kind of like, it's like there's a lot of drama around it. And I've kind of got a backstage look of like, so like Anders Ericsson, I think his book Peak is one of the best learning books that I've read. And a lot of his research is sort of misunderstood. And so he essentially researched like the highest level performers in particular fields, and they try to dissect what do they have in common. Malcolm Gladwell like interviewed Anders Ericsson a few years ago, and they talked for like 20 minutes. And then Malcolm Gladwell wrote his book, and one of the chapters was the 10,000 hour rule, which is like kind of oversimplifying what Anders is saying in his work. And so when I interviewed him, he's like, look, there's way more to it than just, yep, just do 10,000 hours of deliberate practice and you're good to go. It's like very dependent on the skill, and it's hard to put a concrete number on that. Now, I'm not saying Malcolm Gladwell is wrong. I'm not saying like Anders Ericsson's research is wrong. I think they're both partially right. It takes a long time to get really, really good at something. But the tough part is through the game of telephone, we start to lose sight of what they're saying. They're saying it takes a really, really, really long time to become a top level expert at a particular skill. And so we take that and go, now, like when I'm working at a school, some people are like, oh, it takes 10,000 hours to get good at something. No, you can get kind of good at something in a week or a month or a year. Like it's dependent on the skill, but it does not take 10,000 hours to get kind of good at something. And sometimes what happens in the learning world is mastery becomes an enemy of learning, because we're like, oh, I don't have 10,000 hours. Well, you don't have to master something for it to have a dramatic impact on your life. We go back to the idea. It's like, if you get kind of good at something, you can integrate it into your day-to-day life. And then every time you use it, you get a bit better. So I don't have to be the world's best storyteller for the skill of better storytelling to change my whole career. I can get kind of good at storytelling. I can read books on storytelling. I can get some reps and practice of using the tools. I can start to integrate that into my workshops. Now, every time I give a workshop, and I give hundreds of workshops a year, I get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And so the framework that I use is scrap around behind the scenes and get kind of good. That's our goal. Not mastery, kind of good is our goal now, because once you get kind of good, you can start to use the tool in your day to day, and then every time you use it, you get a little bit better. And I think that's the actual real path to mastery versus here I am now, I must master this for this to matter. Now it's here I am now, I have to get good enough to be dangerous. And once I get there, it's actually going to help me a ton. And so that's kind of shifting the goalposts a bit, but it's helped me. And I think that's like a better way to think about it.
That's definitely a great perspective. It kind of reminds me of James Clear when he talks about, being 1% better each day. And, for every workout you do, then you are an athlete. So having that mindset, kind of like you said, of getting a little bit better. So I like that. So when learning, how do you know what skills to focus on and which ones to avoid?
So this is tough because it's like skill can be big and skill can be like really small. And so what I've started to think about, and we'll get to the specific answer, but like one thing that's super helpful for me is just being clear on the distinction between goals and skills. So that's important. So sometimes we get them mixed up. So like a couple of weeks ago in one of my workshops, towards the end, I was like, okay, take 5 minutes, make a list of like 3 relevant skills that you want to build moving forward that are going to help you. And then we come out of the brainstorm and this guy's like, I want to write a book. Okay, that's a goal. Like that's a goal. And there's nothing wrong with that goal. But what I would challenge him to do is, and people talk about this first, is, okay, we have this goal, but what are the processes that can help us achieve that goal? And I actually think there's one layer we should go deeper underneath that, which is what are the skills that would support that goal? So, okay, you want to write a book. It's like maybe one skill is storytelling, another skill is discipline, another skill is finding like good content that would actually be a relevant book. It's like my challenge is have the goal, but then identify these sub skills that can support the goal. And then the upside of focusing on that is if you're intentionally practicing storytelling, communication, discipline, even if you don't write the book, those are skills that are going to help you in a lot of things. And so you could not even write the book, but if you were intentional about the skills, those you can transfer over to other things that you do. They can help you personally, professionally. This isn't me telling people to abandon their goals. This is, yes, have a goal. Of course, we should focus on the processes that can lead to that goal, habits, consistency. And then I think one additional layer is what are the skills that support it? Okay, so that might be a useful framework for people listening. Then as far as like, okay, what skills matter and what don't, that's tough because it just depends on what journey you're on, the skill you're trying to build. One sort of hack is try to reverse engineer people who are really, really good at something. So like, I think Seth Godin is like one of the best public speakers I've ever seen. And so what I can do is go on YouTube and watch like every talk I can find. And I can start to kind of like reverse engineer and dissect that. It's like, well, what makes him different than other people? What is he leaving out? Like, what does he double down on? And through that, I can start to get to this, okay, here are the particular things I'm going to try to master first. So that might be useful, but I think it's so dependent on the context, the skill, that's a tough question.
You have given a presentation on the 2 phases of learning. Could you please explain to our listeners this?
Yes. And I think this will also add to the answer that I just gave. So like we're kind of building off of that. 2 phases of learning. Phase 1 is knowledge acquisition. It's like you can read, listen, observe. you can learn like how to do something. You could learn from people's techniques and tactics. That's watching Seth Godin, kind of like, here's what he does to make a good talk. It's really easy to get stuck in phase one and assume that that's learning. I do it all the time. It's easy because you can do that passively. You can keep reading books and keep watching more Seth Godin talks. What happens is, though, we forget about phase two, which is maybe the more important stage, which is you got to practice the thing. You got to do it. And so the way I think about this is phase one is figuring out how to do something or maybe a better way of doing something. And phase two is practicing the thing, taking action. And my challenge to people is to treat that as a cycle. Learn how to do something, read a book on storytelling. And before reading another book on storytelling, go practice those tactics. Go put them into the wild, try them. And through trial and error, you're actually going to start to like build that skill. Once you hit a plateau, then it's okay to go back and be like, is there a better book on storytelling? Or is there a better model? Maybe there's someone who's better at public speaking than Seth Godin. I can go look at that. And so when you treat it as a cycle of, how do I do this? Or what's a better way to do this? Let me go put that into action. Let me struggle and experiment. If I hit a wall plateau, then I can go back. And when I treat this as a cycle, I think that's a more realistic approach to learning. So when I interviewed Anders Ericsson, a great quote that he said that stuck with me, he goes, look, there's a difference between knowledge and skill. Knowledge you can acquire passively. Of course, you could keep reading, keep listening to podcasts, you can observe, but the skill requires action. And that I think is true. And like you go back to that research of neuroplasticity, it's like, yeah, to build a pathway in your brain, you have to fire the pathway. And the best way to fire the pathway is to do the thing. And these are all things that we know. Like I said earlier, it's like the same rules apply to like building a muscle. Is like, I can't watch you exercise and I get stronger. I have to do the exercise. Now, I could observe your routine and learn from your form, but then to build the muscle, I have to do it. Think of the same rules, like that same logic applies to learning. I can observe you doing something, but then in the end, I got to go do the reps myself and fire the pathways myself.
So this brings me to my next question. In the book Mindset by Carolyn Dweck, she wrote, important achievements require clear focus, all-out effort, and a bottomless trunk full of strategies, plus allies in learning. So Trevor, do you agree with this statement? If so, could you share an example from your life?
Yeah, I mostly agree with the statement. And I like the statement because sometimes when people talk about learning, they only talk about effort. They're like, yep, just work hard. And what she's saying is, yeah, you got to work hard, but also strategy. So it's like, if learning was just an equation of time and effort, it's pretty easy. It's like, hey, this goes back to 10,000 hour rules. We're like, to learn algebra, you just have to spend 47 hours and then you can learn algebra. It's like, obviously that's not how it works. It takes a different amount of time, different strategies. So it's what she's saying is it's complicated. It's not just time and effort. And so strategies is good. Now, the only piece that I would like maybe change with this statement is you could remove some of those things and still see progress. So like I've seen great learning happen in places where people don't have allies. That doesn't make it easy, but I've seen it happen. Ideally, we have people on our team that are helping us along the way, that giving us feedback, but it's not required. Because if it's required, then that kind of sucks for a lot of people. It's like, oh, I guess if I don't have anyone helping me, I can't grow. That's not true. It's going to be really, really hard and really messy, but you can grow. And so that would be the only piece that I would like update. And then as far as an example, it's like everything I've learned has required some of those things. I think one thing that I've been trying to get a lot better at is how we explain stuff visually and verbally. So it's like, how do I get really good at explaining complicated things using a universal language so a second grader could understand it and a Major League Baseball coach could understand it? That's tough because you can't just dumb it down for the second grader. You have to like simplify it so it's accurate and concise and usable. So that's a skill I've been focused on. And it's taken all of those things for me to get kind of good at that skill. I have a long way to go, but that's sort of the one thing that I think matters more than anything I do. Other than finding accurate content, it's I have to be so good at explaining it and I want to keep getting better. And then I think something that adds to that is how visually you explain something. So if you look at a lot of our videos, we're using like a lot of visuals to like make a point stick. And so the visual side and how things are explained are skills that I focus on. And then it's like, yeah, I've worked really hard. I've changed a lot of strategies. And then the bottom line is I get a sickening amount of practice on those two things because I get to use them and try to refine them every time I give a workshop. And so, yeah, all those things were definitely present in these two big skills I've been focused on lately.
So, Trevor, even after you learn a new skill, don't you have to continue to practice it or you'll lose it over time?
Yeah, it kind of depends. So it's like I haven't rode a bike in a really long time, but I bet I could still do it. And so like some of them are more sticky than others. And so I think once you get to that threshold of kind of good, if you start to integrate it, you're going to be in good shape because you're naturally just going to use it as you go. So like if we're working with a basketball player that's trying to add a new shot to their game, once they figure out the mechanics of the shot and practice it a bit, if they start just shooting the shot in a game, we're good. So they don't have to keep going back and like intentionally practicing the shot. They're just kind of using it. And so as long as we get there, we should be in good shape. So like for a lot of these skills, you don't have to always deliberately practice them or they go away. You just got to use them. Now it takes the deliberate practice to get to that threshold of where it's good enough to be used. And then it is kind of complicated depending on like, is this skill more motor based, like riding a bike, shooting a basketball? Like I used to be really good at basketball and I was a really good shooter. I haven't played basketball in 2 years, but I bet I could go play right now and be a better shooter than most people. And I haven't practiced in 2 years. I haven't even touched a ball in 2 years. So like that skill stuck. I haven't even practiced at all. And so I think depending on the time spent in the deliberate practice mode and how we start to integrate it, that's going to kind of change how sticky the skill is. But it's not just as simple as, oh, if you stop using it, it's gone forever. It's kind of like how you like mow down that pathway in your brain. Like how many times are you walking this trail, blazing that trail? That's going to affect how sticky the trail is, even if you're not walking on it.
That's an interesting perspective. It's almost, from what I understand, if you have at least mastered the fundamentals, then you'll be able to bring it back. But if you never actually finish mastering the fundamentals, then that's a different story.
Yeah. So it's like the more deliberate practice, the more permanent change you see. It's like, look, so I do a lot of like video animation for our stuff. There are some things on Adobe After Effects where it's like, I watch on YouTube how to do this thing. I go do it. And then when I make another video 3 months later, I have to go watch the same tutorial. It's like, I just watched, I did it once. It's not sticky at all. Now there's some where I like really try to understand the tool and how to use it. And that's sticky. I don't have to watch any more YouTube tutorials on that. So it's like dependent on how much do I use the tool and how intentional am I in practicing it? That determines whether I have to like go back to YouTube every single time I use the tool. And there are some like that. And so, yeah, I think what you said is accurate for sure.
What are some recommended strategies for learning when you only have a short time to implement it? Also, what is your opinion on the DISC system? So destruction, selection, sequencing, and stakes suggested by a well-known entrepreneur named Tim Ferriss.
I think for me, the tactic is sort of a hybrid model of deliberate practice. Now, in Peak and in Anders' book and in the interview I did with him, it's important to understand it's like the difference between purposeful and deliberate practice. Technically, deliberate practice says you need an expert level coach guiding you through the process, which means most of the time we don't have it. So actually what we're engaging is purposeful practice. So it's like purposeful practice is pretty much all the same things as deliberate without the expert level coach, because most of us don't have access to that. But of course we can still make big change. And so the way I would sort of create this framework would be first, I'd say pick a relevant skill. Like you got to focus on one particular thing. Like that's a rule of learning. I need to like hone in on a particular skill one at a time. Second, I would say find a model. That goes back to the Seth Godin thing. It's like find someone good at the thing. It could be someone you know, but it could also be someone on YouTube. Like there's no rocket science to this. It's like find someone good at the thing that you can observe and you can start to dissect. This is exactly what I said earlier. Why are they good at the thing? Why do I like their approach? So through the model, you're starting to identify the skills that support the bigger skill. The third step would be practice. Now, this isn't just blind reps, it's high quality practice. It's like, if I want to get better at public speaking, it's not just thousands of hours alone in my room. It's, I have these skills and I'm going to go practice it in front of people, whether that's friends or family. That's way better practice than alone in my room. So quantity and quality matter for practice. Some tools to help people improve the quality of their practice. The simplest one, and we could get into the weeds if you want here, but the simplest one is like, try to make the practice kind of like the game. Like if I'm going to give a TED talk in front of a bunch of people, I need to kind of practice talking in front of people. I can't just use my notes in front of the mirror, because in the TED talk, I don't get notes and I'm not in front of a mirror, I'm in front of people. So integrate variables that I see in the performance into my practice. That's usually going to improve the quality. And then maybe the final layer would be get feedback. Now, ideally, you're getting feedback from someone who's good at the thing or guiding you through the thing. But like I said, we don't always have access to that. And so sometimes we have to give ourselves feedback. And if we're honest with ourselves, we can do that. Depending on the skill, you could film yourself. And then you could go back and watch the film and compare that against your model. When I give a workshop, dream scenario is I go out for beers with every single member of the audience one-on-one and ask them for feedback. Like, what did you like? What could be better? That can't happen. But what can happen is at the end of the workshop on my flight home, drive home, or whatever, I can just take a minute and reflect. Okay, what story stuck? Or what moments did their eyes get bigger? Or what moments were they a little fuzzy? And then through that reflection, I'm essentially giving myself feedback on how it went. And so picking skills, finding models, practicing, and getting feedback, what I like about those things is they're accessible and free. Those are things that we could all do. They're free. And with a little bit of creativity, if we're engaged in those tenets of purposeful practice, that's going to improve the quality of our action and help us get better at stuff. So I think that would be my best advice. And I think from what I understand with Tim Ferriss, and I'm a big fan of his as well, it's like that aligns pretty well with his recommendations.
So moving to my next question, you are on a mission to discover and share the science of learning. Your keynotes, professional development program, and workshops are designed to teach people on how to become better leaders and learners. So my question is, Trevor, why is this mission so important to you?
I truly believe that learning is like the most important skill, because becoming a better learner is a universal thing that could help anyone. Like I can't think of any human that wouldn't benefit from getting better at getting better, whether they're in school, whether they're at a Fortune 50 company, whether they're in a prison. We work with people in prisons quite a bit. And so one, I think it's a beneficial skill that helps everyone. Two, I think it's like a fundamental skill that like translates other places. Like if I am a good learner, I can acquire the skills necessary to like thrive in a changing workplace. If I'm a good learner, I become more resilient because I can work my way through challenges and obstacles and problems. If I'm a good learner, I'm more adaptable and agile. Well, skill development, resilience, agility, those are things we've all identified that are beneficial in the workplace, in sports. And I think becoming a better learner is like the foundation for those behaviors. If we understand how to become a better learner, we are going to be more resilient, more agile, be able to acquire new skills that are relevant. And so to me, the reason I'm excited about it is it's a universal skill. It can benefit anyone. And I think it would have an impact on pretty much anyone's life.
That's beautiful. So, as you know, the purpose of this podcast is to inspire people to achieve greatness and enhance their personal well-being. What is your definition of greatness?
I have the honor of like getting around really, really big time athletes, coaches, entrepreneurs, CEOs. And it's hard to identify the exact, like, here are the three things they all have in common. But I think the ones I respect the most and the ones that are at the highest level are all hungry learners. Uh, Karch Karai is the Olympic women's volleyball coach in the US. He is known as like the best male volleyball player to ever live. He like won that award. He is one of the most hungry learners I've ever seen. So the first time I watched them practice, like maybe 6 years ago, I'm in their training facility and I'm sitting there just like in awe at like this learning environment. Karch Karai, it's basically Michael Jordan of volleyball, like out there. And at the end of the practice, he comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, thank you so much for coming out. What did you see that we could be doing better out there?" Dang, like that's the greatest volleyball player to ever live asking me, who's just some rando at the time, how could we do this better? That's hunger to grow. Where 99% of us would make small talk in that situation, like, hey, where are you going to eat lunch? How do you like this Southern California weather? He chose to make that interaction an opportunity to grow, asking for feedback. And so that is maybe the one thing that I see the most in the highest level. It's the hunger to grow. There's really high members of the Cleveland Indians baseball organization, hungry to grow in every single way. And I've worked a lot with them. And so that to me is the trait that I respect the most, and maybe the one pattern I've recognized at the highest level.
So, Trevor, who is a guest that you would like to see on this show?
I mean, Seth Godin would be great. And sometimes it's hard to reach him, but I've had him. I interviewed him a couple years ago, and so that would be a good one. He is so good at talking about a range of topics, and like I said, one of the best communicators I know. So that would be good. But that's that's a lofty goal. It's worth a swing. Another underrated one that is maybe more accessible is Matthew Dix. And I've been talking a lot about storytelling, and he is one of the world's best storytellers. And his book Storyworthy is one of the best books I've read, like maybe ever. And he's so good at talking about storytelling and making it accessible. It's like, look, every human can become a better storyteller. And what you think is a good story is wrong. Here's what a real story is about. And that book has helped me a ton, and he's one of the coolest people that I've bumped into. So Matthew Dix would be good. If you're interested in habits, yes, James Clear is like kind of like the best communicator of habits. But if you were interested in the science, which he does a good job of explaining, but he's really hard to get a hold of. Wendy Wood is one of the world's leading experts in habits. And so that's kind of the hack that I've learned through my podcast is maybe like the famous person in the industry is hard to reach, but you can usually find the scientist. And I kind of like that. And so like the Wendy Wood, we talked about tough emotions. Jeremy Jameson studies like tough emotions and reappraisal. Susan David researches that as well. It's like you can usually access the scientists. So we'll say Wendy Wood, Susan David, Jeremy Jameson, Seth Godin, and Matthew Dix.
All right. Those are some good people, and I will put them on my radar and do my best to get them on the show for both you as well as our listeners.
Nice.
So, Trevor, where can our listeners go to follow you online?
If you go to thelearnerlab.com, you can find all of our videos, all of our podcasts, all of our articles, and my contact information is there. So that's kind of our hub where we put all the content.
So, Trevor, I will make sure to add all that into the podcast notes. I want to take the time right now to thank you for being on the show. You've been very generous with your time, and it's been a pleasure to have you on.
I think this is a really cool mission you're on, and any way I can support, let me know. And it was an honor to be on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Living Your Greatness podcast. If this show has added value, please subscribe, leave a rating, and make a review.